We are back with the fourth episode of Recap Ethiopia after weeks of internet shutdown. A few things have happened in the past 2 weeks since Recap was last shot. So now we're back with the main issues, including the spike of COVID-19 in Ethiopia and the successful first-year filling of the Grand Renaissance Dam. I'm Wongel Tamene, and this is Recap Ethiopia. This week's episode of Recap Ethiopia will start with an update about the novel coronavirus that is causing the COVID-19 pandemic across the globe. With 15 million people infected and over 600,000 confirmed deaths, the pandemic is as strong as ever. It's been nearly 7 months since the first case was confirmed in Wuhan, China, and recoveries are at approximately 8.27 million as the search for the cure persists without any concrete results. The pandemic has also strengthened its grip on Ethiopia, as the nation, riddled with internal and external political issues, recently recorded its largest reported cases in a single day. The stats for the apocalyptic pandemic has exponentially increased in the country, with the number of confirmed cases passing the 11,000 threshold just this week. The death toll for the virus stands at 197 at the time this episode was recorded, while over 5,000 patients have successfully recovered from the pandemic. The virus is not expected to slow its pace in the coming months. A study released late last week by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, based in the University of Washington, concurs with the narrative, as the center is projecting the death toll to rise to 339. According to the projection, by November 1, the death toll could reach the above figure, while daily rates of infection are anticipated to be around 2,700. This figure could also be as high as more than 9,000 patients daily. With an estimated death of 3.2 Ethiopians on a daily basis, the projection is one that must be given due attention and incorporated into the plans of relevant authorities tasked with combating the pandemic. The number of COVID-19 tests conducted is also expected to increase from 5,362, which is the number of tests currently conducted, to about 9,000 tests. This is still a low number of tests, as it represents less than 0.01% of the entire population. The report also includes important information about the hospital resources and policies related to the social distancing. In the study, protective face masks were stressed as a key variable in mediating the effect of the virus in the East African nation. The study modeled an encouragingly high model for mask wearing in Ethiopia, putting it at a staggering 95%. The study also went on to suggest that increased levels of mask wearing are likely to reduce the death toll in the country by November 1 from 339 to 218%, which is an improvement by 1/3 from the initially identified number of deaths by the beginning of November. Earlier this week, Addis interviewed communications head of the National COVID Response Task Force, Dr. Adamu, over the outcomes of the projection. He said, "As you may guess, the projection by such institutions is usually full of inaccuracies. In this light, I am fearful that the projection could mislead the public as to the severity of the coronavirus." The doctor explained to Addis that the projection by the center is generous in certain areas. For example, according to the current projection by the National Task Force for the pandemic, the model for the use of protective face masks is lower than the center's projection, with the following statement: "Our current model for the use of protective face masks is at 76%, while the ICME is modeling 95% of the public uses face masks while in public spaces." Despite disparities in figures, however, on the matter of wearing face masks, Dr. Tegistu noted that it is imperative that the public understand the importance of wearing protective face masks while in public to avoid any surge in cases in the coming months. The country's current internal and external political assignments make the fight against the coronavirus pandemic even harder. Dr. Abiy's administration is being tested on all fronts. Internally, the government is still putting out the fire from the political tensions following the death of singer Hachalu Hundessa that led to the apprehension of key political figures and media personalities, while at the same time dealing with the birth of the Sidama regional state and preparing to enter into constitutional clashes with the Tigray regional state that is adamant on going forward with its regional elections, independent of the federal government. Externally, negotiations around the nation's mega dam project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, reached their peak during the weeks leading to the months of July. The reason being Ethiopia is scheduled to fill the dam in the months of July. This led to Ethiopia's continuous and rather long engagement in negotiations with its Sudanese and Egyptian counterparts during the months of June and beginning of July, with the negotiation reaching the United Nations Security Council, the African Union, the Arab League, and even Trump's White House. It is understandable that the government dedicated resources and attention in order to defend its 10-year project. But Ethiopia is not unique in facing the pandemic amid internal and external strife. The Black Lives Matter movement that sparked protests across the cities in the US and in other countries, the Burundian election that took place in the middle of pandemic, and other major political events have given other nations similar headaches. As the primary duty bearer for the protection of its citizens, the government must continue to protect its people from the pandemic amid any form of internal tensions or challenging international and regional political contexts. However, as the Ethiopian Airlines returns to work and other social distancing measures continue to ease parallel to the spike in cases, the proper authorities must give due attention to the pandemic. Now more than ever, the pandemic requires more attention. The only evidence necessary to support the above assertion is the tremendous increment in the total number of cases and the number of deaths in Ethiopia. The media attention to the pandemic, like the first few months after the virus was first confirmed in Ethiopia, will be crucial. The involvement of the public sector in fulfillment of their corporate social responsibility by creating awareness, as well as supporting the dwindling medical infrastructure of the nation, is also another key determinant in the coming few months. Finally, it is important to highlight the role of the public in persisting to take precautionary measures such as hand hygiene, employment of face masks, and social distancing by following instructions from the proper authorities can be the difference between a surge in cases. According to Dr. Tegistu, the Ministry of Health is preparing to revamp its efforts to fight the global pandemic while anticipating an increase in cases in the months to follow. He also stated that the health intervention initiatives and communications are areas of focus for the ministry as it prepares to face the possible increment in cases in the near future. The doctor stressed that communications on precautionary messages are key to addressing the epidemic with limited resources. Hand hygiene is one area of improvement, according to Dr. Tegistu, as the implementation of the measure has deteriorated significantly since April in Ethiopia. Finally, the growing decline in mask wearing observed amongst urbanites is another area that is of interest to the ministry as it prepares to face the coming months. We all remember that one of the initial measures taken by the government in an effort to curb the pandemic is the closure of the federal and regional courts at the earlier stages of the coronavirus. At the beginning of this week, on Monday, July 20, 2020, the government has announced the reopening of the federal court. The courts, which had been out of operation since mid-March, are expected to resume full service while taking all the necessary precautionary measures and social distancing initiatives. A press release by the Federal Supreme Court's Communications Directorate on Monday, July 20, stressed that the closure of the courts in mid-March was necessary. However, according to the press release, as there is no end in sight for the virus and with the pandemic expected to persist in the coming months, it is not in the interest of legality and human rights to keep the courts closed. This is because limiting the rights to access to justice for a pandemic whose end is nowhere to be seen, as all signs point towards a pandemic here to stay for longer than anticipated, the decision to open the court is properly merited so long as precautionary measures are put in place. The courts are expected to return to their normal working hours as opposed to only considering serious and timely issues. The Ethiopian courts are amongst the many public institutions that were initially closed by the authorities to combat the virus. Most government offices and organizations in the public sector, religious assemblies, and educational institutions were other institutions closed by government to contain the novel coronavirus. The initial closure of the courts was expected to last 15 days, but the time frame changed to nearly 5 months as the virus continued to strengthen its grip on the East African nation. According to the directive issued by the government on the manner of operation of the court, no new cases will be accepted until August 6, as cases accepted prior to the closure of the courts will be given priority as the court resumes full service. Important measures put in place to mitigate the spread of the virus following the reopening of the federal courts include limiting the number of persons accessing the courts to those with court dates, measuring the temperature of all personnel and users of the court, quarantining persons recording more than 38 degrees centigrade during such measurements, disinfecting court facilities prior to the reopening, keeping the recommended 2-meter distance between individuals, mandatory face masks use, mandatory use of sanitary and hygienic materials such as soaps, hand sanitizers, and alcohol, as well as the additional measures to be implemented by the administration of the courts. An indication of how life must move on even during times of pandemic, the opening of the federal courts can be taken as an example of the ease of the lockdown by the current administration. Speaking of cases currently being entertained by the federal court, the major cases of persons arrested after the commotion following the death of pop star Hachalu Hundessa were presented before the Federal High Court over the past 2 weeks. Important figures presented before the court include the cases of Oromo Federalist Congress member Jawar Mohammed and Bekkere Garba, as well as Balderas Party's Iskandar Nagga. No final decision has been reached in any of the major cases, as the total number of persons arrested has passed 7,000, according to reports by Amnesty International. In the interest of keeping the integrity of the cases and the presumption of innocence, Addis will refrain from discussing the details of the matter. Next, a bit of good news. In the past week, Ethiopian authorities have announced the completion of the first phase of the filling of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which came as a silver lining in what is quite a trying period for the nation as it battles with the novel coronavirus and internal political strife. The follow-up extraordinary meeting of the Bureau of the African Union Assembly, convened by South African President and African Union Chair Cyril Ramaphosa, was held virtually on July 21, 2020, on the ongoing negotiations between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt with regards to the first filling and annual operation of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed acclaimed the AU-led process for supporting the three countries to address differences and arrive at agreements. He appreciated the resolve to African solution to African problems undertaken through existing regional mechanisms and reiterated Ethiopia's commitment to continued equitable and reasonable utilization of the Nile River waters, without significant harm to Egypt and Sudan. Another issue that was also raised was that over the past 2 weeks in the rainy season that the GERD first year of filling has been achieved and the dam under construction is already overtopping. The extraordinary meeting undertaken at the heads of state and government level concluded with all parties reaching a major common understanding, which paves the way for a breakthrough agreement. Accordingly, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan agreed for further technical discussion on the filling to continue in the AU-led process and proceed to a comprehensive agreement. Following the successful filling of Ethiopia's mega dam, as usual, people have turned to social media to express their excitement and gratitude. A tweet from Ethiopia's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Gaddu Andargacho, following the completion of the first phase of filling of the dam, reads as follows. የድል ብስራት አባይ ወንዝ ነበር ተገርቶ ወንዝም ሐይቅም ሆነ ከእንግዲህ በወንዝነቱ ይፈሳል በሐይቅነቱ ኢትዮጵያ ለፈለገችው ልማት ሁሉ ለማዋል እጅ ሰጥቷል እውነትም አባይ የኛ ሆነ. For our non-Amharic speaking viewers, the tweet roughly translates to mean the following. Victory cry. The Nile was a river, but now with the dam, it's both a river and a lake. From now on, it will continue to flow as a river while contributing to Ethiopia's development goals as a lake. The Nile is truly ours now. The tweet by the foreign minister encompassed the delight by the authorities and the general public. Other celebratory social media messages were also seen across most social media platforms. Another Twitter user called Faventy shared a personal justification for her joy surrounding the initial filling of the GERD. The story of her 89-year-old grandfather, who has not had electricity in his home, could be changed by the operationalization of the GERD, according to Faven. Her tweet reads as follows. This is my sweet grandfather, who will celebrate his 90th birthday cake soon. His small village up on the highlands of Ethiopia has never had electricity. #GERD first filling marks a historical moment. በመጨረሻም አባይ ለአባዬና ለመላው ኢትዮጵያዊ ይሆናል እንኳን ደስ ያለን. Another tweet from the Ethiopian Minister of Transport, Dagmawit Moges, denoted the importance of the filling of the GERD, equating it with great national victories of the nation. Our beloved Ethiopia marks an important milestone, a breakthrough. The completion of the first filling of GERD is a national pride. Congratulations, my people and everyone who has worked hard to make this happen. በእውነትም ግድቡ የኛ ነው. The completion of the first year filling of the dam is indeed a great milestone for Ethiopia. The controversial dam that has its 3 downstream states, their citizens, stakeholders, and the global community. The project that has taken over a decade was implemented across 3 prime ministers and was entirely built with financial funds raised from the local community only. After countless campaigns to salvage international support for the construction of the dam, Ethiopia had no choice but to raise the funds for the dam locally. In-person campaigns at schools, government organizations, businesses, and other institutions, as well as periodical deductions from the monthly income of civil servants, were some of the few strategies employed by the government to raise such funds. Therefore, it is truly a national victory to see the gird erected on the Nile River, as the nation awaits eagerly to see the fruits of this mega project. Finally, the rather sad report that came from the Ethiopian Airlines was another highlight in the past week. On Wednesday, July 22, 2020, the Ethiopian Airlines flight number ETARH Boeing 777-20F caught fire while loading cargo at the Shanghai Pudong International Airport, which is one of the two international airports in Shanghai, China. The Ethiopian Airlines cargo flight, which was scheduled to go to the Sao Paulo Santiago Airport via transit in Addis Ababa Bole International Airport. The airlines had since sent a group of investigators to Shanghai, China, in an effort to understand the cause of the fire that has damaged most of the upper cabin, according to reports on the Twitter page of the airlines. Preliminary reports from the Ethiopian Airlines suggest that the fire was spotted in the upper cabin of the Boeing 777 aircraft as it was being prepared to taxi out in the Shanghai airport. Crew members immediately reported the fire to the proper authorities. Unfortunately, the fire had spread to most parts of the upper cabin before being contained by the proper Chinese authorities. The airline will collaborate with Chinese officials to properly identify the cause of the fire. The Ethiopian Airlines, which is one of the biggest airlines in Africa, reportedly acquired the aircraft from the Boeing company in October 2014. This news also comes as the airline prepares to increase its destinations following the ease in lockdown policies in Ethiopia and other parts of the world. That's it for this week's episode of Recap Ethiopia. Hopefully, internet will still be here.